We believe in you. Wire your acceptance by August 1st. That is what the telegram said, in the clipped little capital letters of another century. It was dated the summer of 1968. It was addressed to my mother. And she never wired her acceptance. Because 2 weeks before that telegram arrived, she had found out she was pregnant with me. I found it 56 years later in a hat box on the top shelf of her closet, the week after I buried her. And in 11 words, it explained the one thing about my mother I had never been able to understand. I want to tell you what that telegram offered my mother and what she gave up the day she decided not to answer it. Because it took the woman I thought I knew, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable, a little disappointing if I am being honest, and revealed her to be something else entirely. It revealed that the smallness of my mother's life was not a fact about her. It was a gift she gave me at a price I never knew she paid. My name is Lynn Carver. I am 56 years old and I work as a paralegal in Fargo, North Dakota. A quiet life in a quiet city, not far from the even quieter small town where my mother, Barbara, lived her whole life and died this past spring. I am going to tell you what was in that hat box, and I am going to tell it as plainly as I can, because the facts of it carry more weight than anything I could do to dress them up. But first you have to understand the mother I thought I had, so you can feel how completely those 11 words rearranged her. I have thought a great deal since the hat box about how confidently we narrate our own parents. We grow up believing we know them completely because we have known them our whole lives, which feels like the same thing and is not. The truth is, we know the version of them that existed after we arrived, the version that had already been shaped and narrowed and decided by everything that happened before we were old enough to witness it. We meet our parents in the middle of their story and mistake it for the beginning. We never see the choices that made them who they became to us. We see only the result and assume the result was always inevitable, was simply their nature. I had a whole theory of my mother, confident and complete, built entirely on the second half of a story whose first half she had locked in a hat box before I drew my first breath. Almost everyone does. You are probably doing it right now, with someone you are certain you know. My mother lived the smallest life of anyone I have ever known, and I do not say that unkindly, only truly. She was born in that little North Dakota town. She married my father young. She raised me in a modest house 3 blocks from the house she grew up in. She worked part-time at the county office, and she died 80 years later, about a mile from where she was born. She never traveled. She never sought anything, as far as I could see. She was a homemaker and a part-time clerk, and a quiet presence at the back of church, and growing up I was, God forgive me, a little embarrassed by how little she wanted from the world. I was ambitious in the small ways available to me. I went to the city, I built a career, and some part of me looked back at my mother's tiny, contained life with a mix of love and a faint, awful pity, as though she had simply lacked the imagination or the nerve to want more. I am ashamed of that pity now in a way that is hard to put into words. Because I built my modest little career, my paralegal's life in Fargo, and I was quietly proud of having wanted more than my mother did, of having reached past the small town. I thought I was the ambitious one, the one who refused to settle. And it turns out my mother had been offered, at 20, a bigger life than I have ever come within 1,000 miles of, a life on a New York stage, and had turned it down on purpose. The one of us who had truly been given the chance to chase a great dream was her, not me. The one who settled for a small life was her, by choice, not me. My whole sense of myself as the one who wanted more was built on not knowing that my mother had been handed everything and handed it back, for me. I had pitied her from below, thinking I stood above her. I had it exactly upside down. She had stood on a height I have never reached, and stepped down from it quietly, into the small life I then looked down on her for living. There was one thing, one loose thread, that never quite fit that picture, and I had spent my whole life not pulling on it. My mother could dance, not just sway at a wedding, really dance. Sometimes in the kitchen, when she thought no one was watching, she would move with a grace that did not belong to a county clerk in a small town. A trained grace, her spine and her arms doing something practiced and beautiful. And then she would catch herself and stop. And whenever a ballet came on the television, she would go very still and very quiet, and her eyes would shine. and once I caught her crying at it and she waved me off and said it was nothing. I think of that now and it guts me. A woman sitting in a small living room in North Dakota, watching other women do on a stage the things she had been good enough to do and chosen not to, and weeping quietly and telling her daughter it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was the largest thing in the room. It was her whole unlived life flickering on a television screen, danced by strangers, and she swallowed it down and called it nothing so that I would not ask, so that I would not know, so that the wound would stay hers alone. How many times did she do that over 56 years? How many ballets, how many quiet evenings? How much grief absorbed in total silence, 3 feet away from a daughter who noticed nothing and pitied her for having no inner life? She had the richest, most painful inner life imaginable. She just never let me see the door, let alone what was behind it. I danced a little when I was young, she'd say if I asked, and changed the subject. I never pulled the thread, and so I never knew until the hatbox that it was attached to an entire amputated life. She made me the executor, so the house and everything in it fell to me to sort through, and it was slow, sad work, the work of dismantling a life that had been lived very quietly in one place for a very long time. The hatbox was on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, behind the winter blankets, an old round box for a hat no one had worn in 50 years. I almost donated it unopened. Inside, under some tissue paper, were a few things she had clearly chosen to keep where no one would find them. A pair of worn pink leather ballet shoes, far too used to be decorative. A pair of worn pink leather ballet shoes, far too used to be decorative, the satin frayed and the toes darkened from real hours of real work. A program from a dance company, the paper gone amber with age. A black and white photograph of a strikingly beautiful young woman I slowly realized was my mother, mid-leap, suspended in the air in a way that took my breath, caught by a camera in some studio decades before I was born. I sat with that photograph for the longest time, before I even reached the telegram because I could not reconcile it with anything. The woman in it was airborne, her body a perfect taut line, her face lit with a fierce, concentrated joy I had never once seen on my mother in 56 years of knowing her. It was not just that she was young and beautiful, though she was. It was the joy. My mother, in my entire experience of her, had been gentle, contained, pleasant, quiet. I had never seen her blaze. And here, in a photograph from before I existed, she was blazing, fully alight, doing the things she was made to do. I realized I was looking at a person I had never met. My mother before she folded herself up. The woman in that photograph was who she was. The woman I grew up with was who she chose to become so that I could be born. Same person, 2 lives, and a hatbox on a high shelf holding the door between them shut for 56 years. And at the bottom, folded in quarters, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded many times over many years, was the telegram. That detail undid me before I had even read a word of it. The softness of the creases. Paper does not get soft on its own. It gets soft from handling, from being opened and closed, again and again, over years. Which meant my mother had not simply filed this telegram away and forgotten it. She had taken it out. Privately, who knows how often, across 5 decades, she had climbed up to that high shelf, opened the hat box, unfolded these 11 words, and looked at the life she had said no to, and then folded it back up and put it away and come downstairs and made dinner, and been my ordinary mother. The wear on the paper was a record of a private ritual of grief, and remembering that she had performed alone for 56 years and hidden completely. I will never know what she thought, standing there with it, whether she second-guessed, whether she just visited it, the way you visit a grave. But she went back to it, over and over, that much the soft creases told me, and she never once let it show on her face when she came back down. I unfolded it on her bedroom floor, and I read it, and I had to read it 5 times before it would go in. It was from a dance company in New York City, a real one, a name even I recognized. It was dated July of 1968, and it was, unmistakably, an offer. My mother, at 20 years old, had auditioned for and been offered a paid place, with a professional dance company in New York. Delighted to offer you a position with the company, it read. Rehearsals begin September. We believe in you. Wire your acceptance by August 1st. I sat on her floor holding this impossible piece of paper, trying to fit it into the mother I knew, the county clerk who had never been anywhere, and it would not fit, because it was not from her life. It was from the life she did not live. My mother, my small, quiet, unremarkable mother, had once been a dancer good enough that a New York company sent her a telegram begging her to come. I keep using the word unremarkable because that is genuinely how I had thought of her, and I want you to feel the full shame of it with me. Unremarkable. The woman in the photograph. The woman who wore those shoes down to the satin. The woman who got a telegram from New York at 20 and the rarest gift a small-town girl could be handed, and who then performed ordinariness so flawlessly for over half a century that her own daughter used the word unremarkable to describe her, in her own head, at her funeral. That is how good she was at the second hardest thing she ever did. The hardest thing was giving a dream. The second hardest was making sure I never knew she had, and she was so good at it that I insulted her in my own mind for decades. And she took it gladly as the price of my freedom. And she had never gone. She had never breathed a word of it. And I, doing the math right there on the floor, understood why, because I knew when I was born. I was born in March of 1969. I have looked at my own birthday differently ever since. For 56 years, it was just my birthday, the ordinary date a person is born. Now I know it is also the date a dream officially ended. The proof that by the time I arrived, the telegram had already gone unanswered. The deadline already passed. The New York company already given my mother's place to some other girl. My first breath and the last breath of her dream are only a few months apart on the calendar, and the one made the other necessary. I am, in the most literal sense, what she chose instead. Every year on my birthday now I think of that, and it does not make me feel guilty anymore the way it did at first. It makes me feel charged, responsible, as though I owe it to her to be a life worth the one she traded for it. Which meant that in July of 1968, when that telegram arrived offering my mother the entire life she had trained for and dreamed of, she was already, just barely pregnant with me. I sat on that floor for a very long time, and the pity I had carried for my mother my whole life turned, slowly and terribly, into something else. Over the following weeks, I pieced the rest of it together. From my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who was still alive and finally free to tell me what she had been sworn to silence about for half a century. My mother had been the real thing. From childhood, she had danced, with a gift that everyone around her recognized as rare. She had scrimped and traveled to auditions, and against staggering odds, a small-town girl with no connections, she had been offered a place in New York. It was, my aunt said, everything Barbara had ever wanted, the only thing she had ever wanted, the dream she had organized her entire young life around. And the same summer the offer came, she discovered she was pregnant. My aunt told me about that summer in detail, the summer of 1968, and it has become almost mythic to me now, the hinge on which two entire lives turned. My mother was 20. The audition had been months earlier, a long-shot thing she had told almost no one about, traveling to it on bus fare she had saved in secret. She had not even let herself believe it could come to anything. And then, within the same few weeks, two pieces of news arrived in that small town. A telegram from New York saying, "Yes, come, we believe in you," and a quiet certainty from her own body saying you are going to have a child. 20 years old, newly married, holding in the same two hands an invitation to the life she had dreamed of, and the first evidence of the life that was actually coming. My aunt said the two of them sat up a whole night in their shared childhood bedroom, while my mother turned it over and over. My aunt was 16 that summer, and she told me she never forgot that night as long as she lived, because she watched her big sister become a different person before morning. She said my mother cried for hours, the only time my aunt ever saw her truly weep, and then, somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning, she went quiet, and she said, almost to herself, "A baby is a yes you can't take back. New York is a yes I could regret. I'd rather risk regretting the small life than risk a child knowing it cost them the big one." My aunt said she didn't even understand it at the time, she was just a kid. But she remembered the words, carried them for 56 years, and gave them to me at her own kitchen table with her hands shaking. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything anyone has ever said about me. I'd rather risk regretting the small life. She did not even know yet that she would not regret it. She chose it blind, betting her own happiness against the chance that her child would grow up unburdened, and she won the bet. And she never told the child she had placed it. And by morning she had decided, and she never reopened the decision out loud again. She was, my aunt said, completely calm about it by dawn, the way people are calm once they have stopped fighting something. She wrote no acceptance. She simply let the deadline come and go, and folded the telegram, and began at 20 the long, quiet life I would later mistake for the only life she had ever been capable of wanting. She and my father were young and newly married. He had a job and roots in North Dakota and no desire to follow her to New York. And a pregnant woman in 1968 did not take a grueling dancer's position across the country. So my mother had a choice, my aunt said, and it nearly killed her to make it, and she made it in about a week. She folded up the telegram. She did not wire her acceptance. She let the August 1st deadline pass in silence. She stayed in North Dakota, and she had me. And she put the ballet shoes and the photograph and the telegram in a hat box on a high shelf, and she closed the lid on the other life. And she never, not once, my aunt swore, not in 56 years, not in anger, not in grief, not even in passing, mentioned to me what she had given up. She raised me believing she was a woman who had simply never wanted much. It was the most magnificent lie I have ever heard of. And it was a lie maintained not in one grand moment, but in 10,000 tiny ones, which is what makes it almost incomprehensible to me. A single dramatic act of sacrifice I could understand. People rise to single moments. But my mother's sacrifice was not a moment. It was a posture she held for 56 years, every single day, in a million small performances of a contentment she had to manufacture. Every time she said she was happy with her quiet life and meant for me to believe it. Every time she encouraged my small ambitions without a flicker of what it might cost her to watch her daughter chase things, while her own great chance sat folded in a box upstairs. Every time she turned off a ballet or didn't and said nothing. The lie was not a thing she told once. It was a thing she became deliberately and sustained with a discipline that I now recognize as the same discipline that wore down those ballet shoes. She trained herself to seem small the way she had once trained herself to fly. Both took everything she had. I only ever saw the second one, and I called it her whole self. My aunt cried telling me. And at one point she took my hand and said something I have not been able to stop hearing. She said, "Linny, you have to understand. She was never sad about it the way you're imagining. She grieved it, yes, that first year terribly. But after you came, she used to tell me she'd made the trade of her life and come out ahead. She'd say, I gave up dancing and I got Lynn. And dancing was only ever going to last until my knees went. Lynn is forever." My aunt said my mother believed that genuinely, not as a brave face, but as a settled fact. And I sat there undone by it, because I had spent my life assuming that a woman with a small life must feel small, must feel the lack of everything she didn't have. And here was my aunt telling me that my mother had weighed New York and the stage and the whole shining life against a baby in North Dakota, and had decided, and had never once doubted, that she got the better end. I do not know if I will ever be able to take in fully that I was the thing she considered worth more than her dream. It is too large a thing to be told about yourself. I keep coming back to the silence of it, because the silence is where the whole enormity lives. It would have been so easy, so human to let me know. A sigh at the right moment. You have no idea what I gave up for you in the heat of an argument. And we had arguments as mothers and teenage daughters do. A wistful comment over the ballet on television. Any of the 1,000 small ways a person lets their sacrifice be seen, lets it earn them a little credit, a little guilt, a little leverage. My mother used none of them. Not one in 56 years. She made the decision to give me her whole life, and then she made a second, harder, quieter decision that I think was even more loving than the first. She decided I would never carry the weight of it. She would not let her sacrifice become my burden. She would not let me grow up as the daughter her dream had died for. I have turned this over and over, and I have realized it is the precise opposite of what most people do with their sacrifices. And the difference is everything. Most of us, when we give something up for someone, want them to know. Not maliciously, just humanly. We want the credit, the acknowledgement, the small ongoing return of being seen to have sacrificed. We say things like, after everything I gave up for you. We let the cost be visible because being visible is part of what makes the cost bearable. My mother did the harder, rarer thing. She paid the entire price and then hid the receipt, forever, so that the person she paid it for would never feel indebted, would never feel like a burden, would get to grow up light and free and faintly pitying instead of heavy with gratitude. She did not just sacrifice her dream. She sacrificed the recognition of her sacrifice, which is the last thing most people are willing to give up, the very last comfort. And she gave that up too. She wanted me to have a mother I could take for granted. So she made herself into exactly that, on purpose, at enormous private cost. And she succeeded so completely that I took her for granted for 56 years. So she performed contentment with that small life so completely for so long that her own child grew up pitying her for not wanting more. And she accepted my pity, swallowed it, let me think less of her, rather than let me feel that I had cost her anything. She protected me even from the knowledge of what she'd done. That is a kind of love I am not sure I am big enough to fully understand. The grief of it, the timing of it, is the part I have had to make my peace with, and I have not entirely managed it. What helps a little is something I keep returning to. My mother did not need my thanks. That is the thing I have to hold on to. If she had needed it, she would have told me at some point in some way she had 56 years and 1,000 openings. She didn't, because the whole architecture of what she did was built to not require anything back from me. Not even gratitude, not even understanding. She closed the account herself in 1968 and never reopened it. So the thanks I never got to give her was never part of her plan. It is purely my own need, my own ache. The debt I feel is one I invented the moment I opened the hat box. She did not consider me to owe her anything. She had, in her own accounting, already been paid in full by getting to raise me. I find that almost unbearably generous, and also, slowly, freeing. The one person who could absolve me of the debt already did decades ago, by deciding there was no debt. All that is left for me is to live in a way that would have made the trade worth it to her. That I can still do. That deadline has not passed, because she is gone. I found out what my mother was, what she gave up, what she hid, the week after I put her in the ground. Which means I never got to look at her with the eyes I have now. I spent 56 years slightly pitying a woman who had quietly performed one of the great acts of love I have ever encountered. And I never once thanked her, because she made very sure I would never know to. There is a specific cruelty to learning this kind of truth a week too late, and I want to name it honestly, because anyone who has lost a parent knows some version of it. I would give almost anything for 1 hour with her now. Not even to make a scene, just to sit with her at her kitchen table and say, I found the hat box. I know what you were. I know what you gave me. I'm so sorry I thought you were small. You were the largest person I have ever known. But I cannot. The deadline for that, like the deadline on the telegram, has passed. All I can do is what she did. Fold up my regret and carry it quietly and turn it into something better than grief. I did, in the first raw weeks, go through a period of being almost angry at her for the secrecy. I thought, if you had only told me, I could have known you, the real you, while you were alive. I could have asked you about New York, about the audition, about what it felt like to fly through the air in that photograph. I could have loved the whole of you instead of the careful half you let me see. Her silence, which I now understand as love, also robbed me of something. The chance to know my own mother completely. But I have made my peace with even that, because I came to see that telling me would have undone the entire gift. The whole point was that I not carry it. The moment she told me, it would have become mine to bear. And her 56 years of silent protection would have been for nothing. She could not give me both the unburdened life and the full knowledge of her. The unburdened life required the silence. She chose to give me the lighter thing and keep the heavier thing to herself. Being angry at her for that is like being angry at someone for shielding you from a blow with their own body. The bruise is theirs precisely so that it would not be yours. That was a few months ago. Some things have changed in me, and they are quiet changes which I think she would appreciate. I kept the ballet shoes too. They sit on my dresser, those impossibly worn pink shoes, and some mornings I just hold them because they are the most honest thing in the hat box. A telegram is words and a photograph is an image. But the shoes are evidence of the hours, the thousands of hours a small-town girl spent making her body into an instrument good enough for New York to want it. You do not wear shoes down like that on a whim. You wear them down with a decade of discipline aimed at a single dream. And she gave it up in a week and put the shoes in a box and never replaced them, never danced in earnest again. I had the telegram framed, along with the photograph of her in mid-leap, and they hang in my home now where I see them every day. My mother in the air, suspended, in the 1 second of the life she didn't get to live, and the 11 words that ended it. I look at that photograph and I no longer see a woman who lacked ambition. I see a dancer. I see the most quietly powerful person I have ever known. I have started, too, to look differently at every quiet older person I encounter, which is maybe the strangest and most lasting effect of the hat box. The cashier who has worked the same grocery store for 40 years. The neighbor who never married and tends her garden. The uncle who never left the county. I used to file people like that without quite admitting it, under lives that didn't amount to much. Now I cannot do it anymore. Now I look at them and think, I have no idea what is in your hat box. I have no idea what you folded up and put on a high shelf, what you chose, what you gave. What dream you let the deadline pass on so that someone else could have what they needed. My mother cured me, permanently, of the arrogance of assuming that a small life is a small person. It is one of the last things she taught me, and she taught it to me without a single word, from inside a hat box, after she was already gone. And I have done one more thing. I found a young woman here in Fargo, a gifted teenage dancer from a family with no money, the kind of girl my mother was. And I have quietly begun paying for her training, her travel to auditions, the things that stand between a small-town girl and a real chance. She is 17, and she dances the way water moves. And the first time I watched a video of her, I had to sit down. She does not know the whole story. She just knows someone believes in her. I struggled with whether to tell her the truth behind it, and I decided against it. And I think my mother would have understood the decision exactly. If I told this girl that she was the living echo of a stranger's dead dream, that I was funding her because she reminded me of my mother who gave it all up, I would be handing her a weight, a story she had to live up to, a debt. And my mother's whole life taught me that the highest form of the gift is the one that comes without a weight attached. So the girl just knows that someone saw her dance and believed in her enough to help. That is all my mother got in 11 words on a telegram, before life asked her to choose. We believe in you. It is a clean, light, weightless thing to give someone, and it can change the direction of a life. I am simply passing it on, in the same words, stripped of the sad story behind it, the way my mother would have wanted, so that this girl can carry it the way my mother never got to. Forward, onto a stage, into the life my mother only got to touch for one summer when she was 20. The telegram my mother received said, "We believe in you," and she never got to answer it. So I am answering it for her 56 years late by saying those same words to another girl with the same gift. I went to watch her perform last month, this girl, at a regional showcase. She did not know I was there. And when she came out onto that stage and began to move, I understood for the first time, in my body and not just my head, what my mother had been. Because this girl flew. She did the thing my mother did in that photograph, the suspended, weightless, blazing thing. And I sat in the dark of that little theater, and I wept the way my mother used to weep at the ballet on television. And finally, 56 years too late, I understood those tears. They were not sadness, or not only sadness, they were recognition. My mother had been watching her own unlived life dance across a screen, and grieving it, yes, but also, I think, loving it, keeping faith with it, refusing to let the dream die even though she had chosen not to live it. I sat in that theater and I felt her beside me, both of us watching a young woman fly, and I thought, there it is, Mom. There is the thing you gave up. Look how beautiful. Look what you were. And I let myself, for once, not look away from it, the way she always had to. It is the only way I can think of to thank a woman who made very sure I would never know I had anything to thank her for. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is about the quiet lives around us and how badly we misread them. We look at the people who lived small, contained lives, who never traveled, never chased, never seemed to want much. And we assume the smallness reflects who they were, their limits, their lack of nerve or imagination. But you do not know what any quiet life cost. You do not know what was folded up and put in a hat box on a high shelf so that someone else could exist, or be raised, or be spared. The ordinary life in front of you may be the most extraordinary act of love you will ever fail to notice. So before you pity anyone for the smallness of their life, a parent, a grandparent, anyone, consider that they may have chosen it at a price you cannot see, possibly for you. The quietest people are sometimes carrying the loudest sacrifices in perfect silence. The second thing is harder, and it is about the thanks we leave unsaid. My mother engineered it so that I could never thank her, and while I understand the love in that, I would not wish her version on you because it left me with a debt I can now never repay to her directly. So if there is a quiet person in your life, someone whose contained existence you have perhaps gently underestimated, do not wait for a hatbox after the funeral to wonder what their life really cost. Ask them while they can answer. Honor the possibility that they gave up something enormous, long before you were old enough to know. Most of our parents folded away some dream to raise us, and most of them will never mention it, and the deadline to thank them is shorter than we think. The quiet life that raised you may have cost someone the loud one they dreamed of. Find out while you still can. If this story landed for you, drop the word telegram in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, never mistake a quiet life for a small one. We assume the people who never traveled or chased or wanted much were simply limited, short on nerve or imagination. But you cannot see what a quiet life cost. You do not know what was folded up and hidden on a high shelf so that someone else could exist or be raised or be spared. The ordinary life in front of you may be the most extraordinary act of love you will ever fail to notice. Before you pity anyone for the smallness of their life, consider that they may have chosen it at a price you cannot see, possibly for you. The quietest people sometimes carry the loudest sacrifices in perfect silence. Second, say the thanks while they can still hear it. My mother arranged things so I could never thank her. And as loving as that was, it left me a debt I can never repay to her directly. Don't inherit that. If there is a quiet person in your life whose contained existence you have gently underestimated, do not wait for a hatbox after the funeral to wonder what it cost them. Ask while they can answer. Honor the possibility that they gave up something enormous before you were old enough to know. Most of our parents folded away a dream to raise us and never mentioned it, and the deadline to thank them is shorter than we think. The quiet life that raised you may have cost someone the loud one they dreamed of. The quiet life that raised you may have cost someone the loud one they dreamed of. I'll see you next time.